Murdered in Europe. Guns are killing thousands of people in the EU every year. In 2011, the death toll topped 5,000. While not comparable to the US, Brussels says more needs to be done to tackle gun crime across the bloc. But how might any changes to the current laws affect legal weapons owners? We've been to France, a country with one of the highest rates of gun ownership in Europe. Paul Hackett reports.
Marseille, Europe's capital of culture for 2013, or should that be capital of crime? For decades, the old Mediterranean port has been plagued by violence connected to the illegal drugs trade, but in the last 2 to 3 years, Marseille's gangs have been especially murderous. In fact, the recent violence prompted one leading local politician to call for the army to be deployed to tackle the open warfare between the drug gangs. That call was rejected by the national government, with Paris deciding to send extra police reinforcements instead. But few politicians deny that Marseille has some big problems, especially with guns. If not the army, then why not Batman? In fact, some residents have gone as far as to set up a website calling on the Caped Crusader to rescue them. The group's spokesman denounces the idea of sending in the army as a political stunt, insisting what is needed is a credible plan to tackle Marseille's underlying social problems.
What's the use of putting an aircraft carrier in the port of Marseille? Sending in the army and triggering a civil war will not resolve the problem. What's needed is to get public services that are already in place to tackle the problems more effectively.
At EU level, there's an admission that the bloc's open border zone has made it easier for criminals to ship guns. French police experts say smuggling has put powerful military-style firearms such as AK-47 assault rifles onto the country's streets.
The AK-47, a classic model which is an excellent war weapon that's now become an excellent weapon for gangsters. There are large numbers of weapons coming from Eastern Europe and the former Yugoslavia. The former Yugoslavia is only 6 or 7 hours in a car from the south of France. So it's just next door. You can go to the Balkans or Eastern Europe and pick up a lot of weapons.
In addition, the European Commission estimates about 500,000 legally registered firearms have been lost or stolen. It's currently investigating ways to improve gun owner safety, not least to prevent future massacres, such as those that took place in Winnenden in Germany in 2009 and Liège in Belgium in 2011. But any revision of the current laws is likely to face stiff opposition from legal gun owners, such as hunters and sport shooters, who reject any connection to criminals and illegal arms trafficking.
We're the legal owners of firearms, registered and licensed, so regulating us more will not eliminate the number of illegal guns. If criminals want to get weapons, they'll get them, since by definition they are criminals and outside the law, and they don't respect the law.
But Brussels insists more can be done to reduce gun-related violence in Europe and seems intent on reopening the debate. It has just launched a discussion with the aim of finding a more common approach to firearms among the bloc's 28 member states.
Joining us now to discuss the issue of gun control in Europe is Brian Donald, Chief of Staff at Europol, and Manuel Esparago, Head of Political Affairs at FACE, a group which represents the interests of 7 million hunters in Europe. Gentlemen, many thanks for joining us on the front line. Brian, it's interesting because we have a very different situation in Europe than the US. Our gun control is much stricter. Really, is there cause for concern?
I think the report that you've just shown from Marseille is a situation that would be familiar to many police officers in many cities across Europe. Increasingly, we are hearing of concerns raised by police chiefs and senior investigating officers that gun crime is becoming more and more a daily part of their business.
So, where are these guns coming from, though? Are they coming from the legal sources, or are they predominantly coming smuggled through from, well, the Western Balkans, for example.
I think your reporter hit the nail on the head very well. The Schengen information system, for example, an EU-wide police information system, has over 500,000 records of lost and stolen firearms. In addition, a gentleman from Lyon, the forensic scientist, points out that he's regularly seeing weapons seized from the Balkans. And I think the main sources of weapons in the illicit market are those that are diverted from stolen or lost firearms, those that are smuggled. And increasingly we're having a problem with weapons that are being converted from blank firing or deactivated weapons.
So, Manuel Espargo, would you say then that your members aren't being careful enough with their weapons? Because we're hearing that a high majority or a high amount of weapons, legally owned weapons, are entering the illegal market.
Well, I think our members are very careful, and actually they are subject already to very strict rules. And I would like to contest those figures provided by the Schengen information system, because the Commission has been claiming for some time that legally held weapons continue to feed the legal market, which is a very serious claim. We've been asking for evidence to substantiate such a claim, and we have only received this vague answer that there are 500,000 firearms reported as lost or stolen. But
well, I could just clarify that, because in a recent meeting held at Europol, 3 member states, small countries, reported seizures of 30,000 illegal weapons in a year. So the point I'm trying to make is that the vast majority of those 30,000 illicit weapons that were seized by the police are diverted from the legal market.
So, Manuel Espargo, you must take a police officer's intelligence as it stands.
We would like to be able to see that data, because the exact figure seems to be 421,000, but we would like to know the period that this figure covers. Does it cover 15, 20 years? Does it cover all EU member states? What is the origin of those firearms? Because there is a Europol report that actually indicates that one of the sources of illegal firearms is actually the police and the army. So, well, we'd like to break down those figures.
No. I mean, that, we can be serious about these things, but, I don't accept that there is a diversion from the police and military in the EU.
It is in the Europol
report. There is a reference in a Europol report to the fact that stockpiled military weapons may be smuggled into the EU. That is not the same as saying that the EU police and army are leaching weapons into the market.
So if we look at the illicit trafficking, in terms of trafficking, where are you seeing weapons come from predominantly? What's your intelligence telling you there?
The Balkans is clearly a source, and other countries just outside Europe. We have concerns about the possibility of weapons coming from North Africa. But we're also receiving reports from member states in respect of the reactivation of deactivated weapons. We have it on good authority that you can buy an AK-47 deactivated in country 1, you can buy an AK-47 legally deactivated in country 2, and an AK-47 legally deactivated in country 3. All 3 weapons have been lawfully deactivated and comply with domestic legislation. You put them together, you have a functioning AK-47. That cannot be right.
Well, actually, I'm very happy that Brian is raising that issue. The EU Firearms Directive, which lays down very strict rules, already requires that member states ensure that every deactivated firearm is rendered permanently unfit for use. So why do you need to change the current rules if there is already a piece of legislation which is legally binding and the member states should actually comply with?
But why are you so concerned about rules potentially being changed? Why is that such a concern to you if we are talking about people being kept safe?
You cannot simply say that, in order to keep people safe, we have to change the rules. There has to be some evidence. It's not so much to ask for.
I mean, the rules are going to affect 600 million people, which are the citizens of the EU. If you look at what the Commission communication are saying, in the first part, what they're trying to do is approximate, is what I think the phrase that they use, approximate the legislation. So you're quite right. There are rules in relation to deactivation. The point I'm making is make it the same rule. The second point is manage the illicit market, not the legal market, but the illicit market. So deactivation, diverted weapons, illegal trafficking.
How easy is it for me to go and buy a gun?
Well, they're not sold over the counter. Member states have to be able to link the firearm to its owner, normally through the serial number. The person who acquires a firearm has to be permitted to do so according to national legislation, but the national authorities have to ensure that that person is not a threat to public security. And that applies to all firearms, even a hunting shotgun.
But if we look at the massacres that have taken place in Europe, pretty much at the rate of one a year, often, as you mentioned, these people got their guns legally, and they often had mental health issues. Do you think that there should be mandatory mental health checks?
We believe that it should be a decision for the member states. We think that they are in a better position to ascertain whether a mental health test is necessary or not. There are countries where there is no such a requirement, but there is an interview with the police.
But then we know that some countries have much laxer rules than others.
Well, of course there are differences, but
then there
all
are
of them have to comply with the directive. So the directive lays down those minimum standards they have to comply with, and then they can introduce any kind of restriction they wish.
And a final word from both of you. If there is something that can be done to safeguard the legal guns getting into the wrong hands, whether you dispute that fact or not, what would it be?
Well, I think better implementation of the current rules, both at EU and national level. For instance, with regard to deactivated firearms or blank firing pistols, I think that if there are member states that are not complying with the directive because, for instance, they allow the sale of blank firing pistols that can be converted to shoot live ammunition, then I think the Commission should act.
2 points based on over 30 years police experience. One, make sure that the people who hold firearm certificates are fit and proper persons. Secondly, lock them away. The vast majority of weapons that are lost or stolen are because the owner has been careless. If owners were responsible, kept their weapons locked securely, then far less would be diverted to the illicit market.
Gentlemen, many thanks. There are an estimated 80 million legally held civilian firearms in the EU. Do you own a gun? Do you think the current gun laws in Europe are working well, or should more be done to make things safer? We want to hear your views. You can join our debate on social media. In the meantime, On the Frontline returns next month.